welcome to the Salted Orange Podcast. My name's Luke,
My name's Matthew.
and welcome to our discussion today. Today is episode 4, the big 4. Today we had decided we wanted to kind of have a discussion on the good and the bad, uh, those two feelings.
Mm.
And so the first question that Matthew's going to ask
Well, what are you gonna
is
just
actually
are you just gonna ask it,
it,
or are you gonna ask me? They have words. Are you gonna ask it, or are you gonna let me ask it? That's what I'm asking
I
you.
mean, it depends on if you want to answer it
I mean,
yet
I
or
think
if
I'm
you
gonna
want to hear
answer it
me.
at some point, but I think starting off with your perspective is gonna be better. So, first and foremost, before we jump into that, make sure if you guys haven't already, you subscribe to the channel here on YouTube, or if you're watching on Spotify, you can follow us for more. There's plenty of content that should be coming out again every other Sunday. We're planning on uploading, so please feel free to interact with our content and share it with your friends. Love to have them here, and most importantly, share your thoughts with us in the comments. If you have something that we said you like that you want us to talk about more about, we can do that. Or if we're not covering something that you want us to talk about, we're glad to hear about it. But we have a question for you, Luke, to begin. Can we only follow God when things are. Let me phrase this again. Can we only follow God when good things are happening to us?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the reason we pose this question is me personally, I wanted to approach this topic is because I feel like sometimes we do the feel good church and we only want to hear God when things are going good. And I've seen multiple people when um, they come out of a bad situation and then they come to church and they have like a, you know, awakening, I would say. Then they, have good things start happening to them. And I feel like God tests us then. I think that's part of the test is, it's almost like, when if you win the lottery or something like that, you have to like hold yourself back from wanting to spend all of it.
Mm.
And so I feel like sometimes when we get the kingdom of God, we're like, oh my gosh, this is great. And then they almost get this feeling of like, oh, I don't need God anymore. I've got everything I need.
Mm.
Um, so I guess that would be my perspective on that so far. But I don't think it's bad to go to church when or to follow God when we're feeling good because church is great and God is great. So,
All the time.
um, hmm
I don't know if you were trying to go there, but that's what I picked up on. Yeah,
so I thought that was a Baptist thing. Is that a Baptist thing or is
no,
that a
it's
Methodist
a
thing?
Methodist thing. Did you not get right? Were you not saying it's God is good all the time? All the time, God's good when you were younger. No.
No.
Wow.
I mean, we did, but like I always thought every time we said it, I was like, "This is a Baptist thing.
I
This
mean,
is not a myth
from
thing."
it was something we did every week when I was a kid. So I guess that's why I associate it that way. But I did go to a conference, a youth conference back in 2015, and we actually everybody knew it. So I think it's universal. I don't want to claim it's Methodist, but that's where I knew it from.
I mean, I always thought it was Baptist because I mean, I've been in a Baptist church and I mean, I used to go to Baptist camp and they would say it, and I was like, "That's a Baptist thing," because we never say that in my church. But then my pastor started saying it, and I was like, "What?"
I guess it's universal. So that's that's good. Yeah. Speaking of that, I think that's targeting what we're talking about today. It's like God is good all the time. Um, Even when we're not good, God is good. I like that way of thinking about this and wrapping your head around it. And so to go to the question we're talking about, can we only follow God when good things are happening to us? I don't think we can only follow God. So that's the word that's tripping me up is only. I think we can follow God in the bad times too, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But I agree with you that it's not a bad thing for us to be celebrating and be in the church when good things are happening. I mean, those are the people who you're going to connect that you've already connected with. They're your community, they're your family in some cases, they're your close friends, the people that are holding you accountable, and so they're going to celebrate with you when those good things are happening. Now, I know that that's not always the case because not every church is formed in like a communal sense, but if we're forming a church and we're living in discipleship as a community rather than living in as a church, we're going to celebrate the good things that are happening in each other's lives, and we're going to hold each other when the bad things are happening.
Yeah, I completely agree. Um, I guess the reason I wanted to pose this question is because I was always like, I always got that feeling of when like people would come to church and then they would, we would have a great experience with them and they would find growth in themselves, and then they would just leave immediately. And I was like, you got your happy. It was almost
Mm,
like you were just there for your happiness. You weren't there, I mean that. I mean, I guess to say that would be kind of selfish, but um, I mean, I always want people to stay there. I mean, they're part of your family. It's almost like you're losing a
mm,
person of your family when
right,
someone leaves your church.
right. Yeah.
Um,
I'm kind
but
of thinking about it. Another question came into my head, and you kept talking, and I just lost it for a second. I'm trying to pull it back, so I'm going to keep talking until I figure out what the word is, what I wanted to say. Um, no, I'm not. I have no idea what I was going to say. Keep going.
I would say though, especially like God finds like good things out of the bad things though, especially like
Sure.
if we were gonna go to like, but I mean, you can be a good person and start going to church. I mean, just because you didn't go to church before doesn't mean you have to be a terrible person.
Right.
Um, I mean, I have friends that they're agnostic or atheist, and they're good people, but and I mean, they don't really have that bad of lives. They're not doing bad things, but they just don't go to church. But I would feel like if they did go to church, it's not like they're. I mean, we would say that they're improving their life, obviously, because they're coming to church, but that not isn't necessarily true that they are improving their life. Um, but we expect through them coming to church that they will learn and they will find improvement through their life. I mean, because I even feel like even you and me, like we have things morally and stuff that we are developing through like either a Bible study that we're at or through listening to other people in our church community.
Hmm.
So I feel like to say that, I mean, because I posed that question of like, I posed that question mostly on like the people that they come into the church and then they are following God and then it gets good and then they're like, well, I've hit that good. I just need to get
Mm.
out before it goes bad.
Uh,
Um,
so in my mind, that's like you're hitting that level of okay. I feel like I've done what I need to do to be saved, and then
mhm,
I don't have like now that I'm here, like I'm good. Like I don't have to try anymore. And that is a
mhm,
faith versus works conversation there, bud.
mhm,
'Cause if you have, we're not. We can talk about faith and work, faith versus works later on in a different episode. But um, generally, the most Christian perspective. I guess I shouldn't say most. There are some Christian perspectives that are focused on faith, which is you trust in God and that's what's going to save you. And there's others that are like, okay, depending on what you do in your life, that's going to be what determines if you're saved or not. And obviously, there's all these different encampments along the spectrum, and a lot of places that sit in the middle too. So you can't
mhm.
really pick. You can pick one or the other. You can choose whichever way you want, whichever way works for you. But I think that's you at the end of the day. And that was what I was thinking about earlier. Is like you're saying you're gonna leave once you have the good. I don't understand why you would leave at that point? What would take you out of the church at that point? If everything's going well in the church, the old saying is like if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Why
Hmm.
would you leave if that's something that's fulfilling you and making you feel good?
I think a lot of times is because they'll find something that makes them uncomfortable.
Mm,
They're afraid of that change. You get what I'm saying?
yeah,
Because I mean
definitely.
that's a big problem in our churches right now. Is people are afraid of change. They don't want to change and go to a new type of worship, or
Mm,
they don't want to change. I mean, they'll get so bad that it like if you change the time of worship, like if it's not 11 o'clock, hey, I'm not going to church there anymore.
right.
And like, I mean, there's some underlining things of reasons that they're not wanting to go there anymore. That are like that's just the catalyst that makes them not want to leave. That not makes them not want to be there. But um, I think a lot of times people get into like a good situation and then um, they feel like especially because I've seen people that like when they when they start going to church they start posting stuff on Facebook like saying um, like all these different Bible verses and stuff like
Hmm.
that about renewing yourself, about making yourself better, and then stuff
Right.
like that. And then like you'll see them like maybe like a year later, and they're not even going to church anymore. And I'm like, well, why did you post all this stuff then? And like, and their life is not like where it was before, like before they had started posting that stuff.
Hmm.
So obviously they've gotten better. You
Right.
know, they have a better life, but they just use God to kind of like get to that,
Mm.
get to that stepping stone.
That reminds me of like the Pharisees in the Gospels, where they're
Mm-hmm.
always like showcasing themselves and putting themselves out there. It's like, oh, look how well I'm praying. You know, I have this giant, box on my forehead that I'm praying, and I'm making a big deal out of it. So there's people who are doing the posts like Bible verses or songs or those kinds of things. It's like, look at me. It's like I'm a Christian. They are mimicking that behavior to me. It's like this is just I'm just showing you that I'm a Christian and I have all these good qualities and I'm doing amazing things and I'm following God, but behind the scenes, my life is just not going any further. Like it's just staying there. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's the issue with those kinds of relationships. Like if you're genuinely like, oh, this I found this really good song and I want to share it with people, that's why you're sharing it, sure. But if you're sharing it because it's like, I look at me, I'm going to church, I'm doing this and that. It's again going back to that conversation we had of checking off the boxes. It's like, oh, people think I'm a good person because I'm doing these things, and it's not really for your gain, it's for vanity, and that doesn't work.
I just think that like I mean, because I've just seen so many of my friends do that, um, and like I'm not saying you got to live the perfect life behind your Facebook or behind your Instagram or whatever,
Mhm.
because we all obviously know that like people's lives on Facebook and Instagram are like the highlights of their life,
Mhm.
not the everyday, obviously.
It is
But
the persona that we want to showcase the world that makes us look like as perfect of a life that we can possibly have.
yeah,
That's what we're doing.
but I think I think a lot of times when people post that stuff, they're like it's almost a judgmental too sometimes because you can see that like um I think a lot of people rush into Christianity with that like oh I want to get excited about it and they
Hmm.
don't want to actually like sit down and be like this is a commitment and stuff like that.
Right.
And I think that's where a lot of those posts come out. I think a lot of it is like, oh, I saw this pastor or I saw this, and it gets me excited. I mean, it's the same thing, which I think this will be a great topic to talk about right now. Is like the feel good church, rather than the actual church,
Hmm.
or like the the sermon that's not the feel good sermon.
Right.
Because I definitely feel like um, I feel like people go to church when it's the feel good church, when it's the feel they don't want to hear that they've done wrong. They don't want to hear that they've done something bad. Um because I mean that's all I would have to say about, when things are going good because I mean a lot of people go to church to get that feel good moment.
Mm. Yeah, it reminds me of like how we use like, oh, I'm bringing the other really not good conversation to have at Thanksgiving dinner. Politics. It's similar to how
Hmm.
we describe to politics. We want the things that are gonna affirm our position, and not the things that are gonna challenge us and make us think. That is the difference. And as somebody who sometimes writes sermons, I always try to make my sermons have challenges in them, and I've gotten better at them recently, where it's not just one challenge, just one upfront challenge. It's a few, and it's based on like where you're getting into the sermon, like how it's based on what layer you can get into. It's like, okay, people who are just starting out, you might want to try the easy challenge that I'm going to throw at you. People who
Hmm.
are a little bit further and might be like, okay, that one's too easy. Let's give me a little bit, like maybe a little bit harder, and that next challenge will hit them. And then there's people who get all the way to the end of my sermon, and it's like, oh, this thing is huge and it's really difficult, but I'm going to tackle it. It's really a dynamic of, I think, the pastor. And because I've been in this position of being a pastor before, you really have to think about the dynamic of your church when you're making a sermon. Those churches that are doing just feel good stuff, maybe that's what they need at the moment. I'm sure their pastor is probably got all these other topics and conversations that he or she wants to go into, but they probably just like, okay, our church needs these good moments right now. That's what we're gonna do. We're gonna foster this for a little bit, and then we'll start getting into some other things as we're going. Maybe that's an approach to it, but I do think like you have to have the balance of everything. You can't just
Hmm.
do one type of sermon and expect people to get it. You have to try different things. That's why I'll always be like, well, I've preached on this before, but I preached on it with maybe this passage, and I used maybe this kind of lens. Like maybe I looked at like a historical lens. I'm gonna look at now
Hmm.
a practical lens, or I'm gonna look at like um, a a philosophical lens in this case. Like there's different ways to approach every topic, and maybe your churches just need to experience those sermons in just different lenses as they're going.
I mean, yeah. I mean, that's all. I mean, I feel like if you did talk about the feel good versus the brimstones thing, most people want the feel good. They don't want to
Mhm.
have the brimstone. I mean, I strongly believe that you don't need fire and brimstone anymore in church, but um, I also don't think you need to feel good all the time. I think you should go in wanting challenge. I mean, because even this Sunday, which my mom got on to me because I was sitting there and I got my phone out and I was typing on my phone, and my mom was like, "You're texting somebody." I was like, "No, I'm not." I was like, "I'm writing notes from the sermon because it's not that I was writing exactly what he was writing. I was writing like I thought of something that we could say on the podcast or something that I could use in a sermon, and I was like, got to put it in my phone really quick because I learned this thing from this conference I went to. They said that this was a songwriter conference, and they said that a lot of times during a sermon you might just like get song lyrics out of it. And I was like, you could probably do the same thing with like a sermon. Like if you go hear someone else preach, you might get something that you could put in your sermon
Oh
or
yeah.
get something that, would work for anything. And so like I feel like when you listen to like something that's not like a feel good, I would say that there's three types instead of saying there's only two. Instead of saying there's a brimstone and a feel good church, I would say in the middle there's a challenge church. Like
Mm.
one where you feel like you have been made to think more of like yourself. You think about your morals because I mean church is. I mean I feel like being a Christian is all about morals. I mean that's
Mm.
where you build most of your moral foundations is like what you believe and what do we say when we're a Christian? We believe. So it's the same thing. So I feel like if you can't challenge what you think, then you're not getting that middle of the ground church that I think that middle of the ground kind of sermon that I think most people need.
Hmm. I wouldn't even say that challenge is a middle perspective. I think it's an alternative. So I don't think it's a binary line. It's fluid. So there's multiple points that you can get to. Um, and I like doing the challenge sermons just because I feel like if I'm not making you think when you come to church, I'm not doing my job. If I'm the
Well, yeah, you're
one
making them
giving the
fall asleep.
message, yeah, I'm making you fall asleep, or I'm making you feel a way that I don't want you to feel. I want you to feel like you're being challenged, and I want you to be like, oh, I'm either really strong in my thought of this practice that I was doing, because the pastor said, oh, I'm doing this, so I'm good. Or maybe it's like, oh, well, maybe I'm not quite reaching that mark. What can I do to change that so I can get there? But I do see places for, yeah, all the perspectives of sermon types. Like there's a need for everything, and different people need different things. And I go back to the point I said earlier. It's like when you're a pastor of a church, you really got to know your congregation, and you really got to know what is needed that week, because that's what's going to make you have successful sermons. That's what's going to make people keep coming back. Not that this is a podcast for pastors about what they need to do to keep their church
Hey,
alive.
they need to be watching just as much as the regular people do.
But I mean, those kind of things I think are helpful, and I really take that into consideration, particularly at the church I'm at. When I get the chance to preach, I'm really thinking about, okay, what aspect of myself can I take and share with the congregation that is going to open their eyes about a particular topic that I'm interested in discussing, or that the lectionary is telling me to discuss, or that this passage that I'm given to preach on is going to give me to discuss.
Have we talked about the lectionary on the podcast
I
yet?
don't think
Because
we have.
I've had a couple friends ask what that word means, and so if you could explain it better than I can,
Sure.
I'm terrible at it,
So the
but maybe they might
lectionary.
learn something from it.
Okay. Well, here's your learning point. The dictionary word lectionary. Lectionary is a standard of a few passages of scripture that allows you to explore different biblical themes throughout the year. So they do it in three different cycles. There's a cycle called year A, year B, year C. At the current point, we just started, I believe, cycle B. I'm not quite sure, but Advent Sanctuary cycle. So the cycle changes, and it gives you a Old Testament, a New Testament, typically a gospel lesson, and then either one psalm or two psalms or a proverb in there. So you have a few different scriptures you can pick from to preach on, and really it's a good measure for pastors who like to preach the same sermon, because otherwise you get people like me who do 6 months of love sermons, and people are like, okay, we get it, we want you're this is about love. I mean, that's like the biggest point for me, but you know there are other things to talk about too. So it
Yeah,
helps
and
pastors get out of their own head of like, I
that's
want to
the
talk
way I was
about
kind
this,
of
maybe I
trying to
need to do
explain
this.
it. That was kind of the way I was trying to explain it, but I had a friend tell me that they were like, "Oh, it sounds like the overarchy is like telling you what you have to preach." And I was like, "No, it's more just like a supplementary so that way it helps
Yeah,
pastors write sermons."
at the end of the day, it's a suggestion. You can preach on
Exactly.
whatever you want. Like,
Exactly.
I literally just did I just wrote a sermon today, and I was looking at the lectionary for the week, and I'm like, I don't really feel any of these. So I went looking for something else, and I'm like, I like this to tie with my passage, because I knew the theme I wanted to talk about. I didn't know where it was spiritually grounded in biblical text, so I had to find that. And I found a really good passage from Proverbs that I'm going to use for that.
Mhm.
That I don't
So
know if
that
it
was kinda
is
like
the
a side
lectionary.
note. That was kinda like
Yeah,
a side
side
note just because
conversation.
I had had so many people, like, talk about that, and as soon as you said that, I was like, "We need to talk about that."
All right,
But
well, let's pull it back
I think a
to the
good way to get us
conversation.
back is I think a good way to get us back is to say, you know, I think we need to follow God when the good is happening, and when we get to that point where we are happy with where we are, I mean, obviously, we will grow from there, but
Right.
where we feel like we're like, "Oh my gosh, I'm having a way better life now."
Hmm.
I think that's when we need to start looking back at the people that are coming to church when the bad parts of life happen,
Hmm.
which that's kind of like our second question
What
is
about going
what
to
are
church only when during the bad parts of your life, Luke?
yeah,
Tell me
exactly.
about it.
So, um, I think that's where most people go to church. I mean, you hear all these sad sob stories where they're like, after my mom died, I came to a funeral and then I,
Right.
decided I wanted to go to church. Which I mean, when I have my funeral, I want it to be a revival. So I mean, you're probably about the same way.
No. No,
Really?
I don't want to force it on people. Like
Oh, I do. I want to
you
say,
can you can come if you want.
I
Like
don't want to
I'm not gonna
force it
make
on
you.
him. I don't want to force it on him, but when my grandpa passed away, the pastor said, "Do you know my grandpa's name was Bob?" So he said, "Do you know Bob's God?"
Yeah.
And it like really like hit me hard. Like I mean, I cried because my grandpa died, but I also cried because I was like, "Man, that was a sermon."
Mm.
And my grandpa would have been like so happy, but um I do feel like um which I think it is not terrible to go to church when you're, when you're in the bad part of your life. That's when you should be going to church.
Hmm.
Um, but there is some times that you would go because you're hoping something good will happen out of it. And I
Mm.
mean, it depends on the way you look at it, obviously. Um, there's probably 100 different perspectives you can have on that. But I want to pose that question to you because I mean the way I'm kind of looking at it is like you're if you're going when you're bad your bad times, um, if you stick to it, then yeah, that's great. But because I'm almost thinking about because we're almost getting towards like Christmas, and I think about this. I mean, we just had Thanksgiving, and I think about this all the time. I think about our CNEs or our TCEs, whatever you want to call it. And it's our Christmas, Easter, Thanksgiving people.
Okay. Thank you for explaining, because I didn't get it.
Yeah, CNEs. I have a friend that he'll say, he made a Facebook post one time. He said, "Welcome to all our CNEs," and it was on Christmas, and he was
Mm.
like, "Hope you're enjoying the service or whatever." And
I
it's
always call those
because
like high holy day attenders,
oh yeah,
but
and
I
I'm
get it.
like that. I mean, that's where I'm looking at like a lot of people their first time to go to church is on Christmas or like Easter, and like it's because they have heard all the buzz about Christianity. I mean, because those are our big days. I mean, Easter, I mean, you hear that the whole thing is about Jesus and you're like, oh crap, it wasn't about Jesus before, but now it needs to be. um and so I think your bad moment could either be morally, like by like you're doing bad things, or you're in bad luck, like you don't have money or anything like that, and you're struggling in your life and stuff like that. It could be the loss of a loved one, anything like that. So I'd just like to hear your perspective on that.
There's a lot. There's a lot in this, I think. So I the thing that keeps coming back to my mind is I'm like thinking about the bad parts. I'm thinking of the causation, and I feel like you're having the bad parts of your life because you're not going to church now. That's very pastoral of me to say that.
Hmm.
Um, but I do think that God is a part of your life through everything. Like as soon as you start believing, it's like okay, every element of your life now has God entwined with it somehow. And so going during the bad parts obviously is a great option to get yourself out of it. Well, to help maybe get yourself out of it a little bit better. But also it's a way for you to kind of refocus your perspective because you're so woe is me. Or you're so distracted. I feel like we get away in those moments. We shut everything out. It's like nothing's gonna help me. This is just how my life is. It's terrible. Now I'm doing nothing. Like doing nothing other than what I have to do to survive. And that's what you do, and you shut everything else out. But there is that hand that gets extended to you by somebody or someone. Particularly if you're like a churchgoer, like they're like, "Hey, come back. It's we haven't seen you in a while. Come hang out. We'd love to have you back in our worship service." But also, it's for those people like maybe God touches them and says, "Hey, there's that church that's like a block down the road because they're on every street corner pretty much. Like, just go pop in on a morning that they're having service and see what it is about." And I feel like coming in those moments is a way for you to get your foot in. It's a way for you to start feeling better about yourself and feeling better about your situation. And maybe that's what you need. Like it can provide you with opportunities to make connections with friends, with people who will become your community. People will
Hmm.
come and hold you and support you in your endeavors. So I don't think it's a bad idea. I don't think it's the only. Again, the word "only" trips me up in this. Only is such a. It's like when you're taking true false test in school. Like they warn you about words like "only" and "almost" and like those like very definitive or very open-ended words that can mean
Hmm.
multiple things. So "only" is very definitive, and it's like this is the only like once it's good, we're going back to the first conversation we had where it's like, okay, I'm good, bye. No, it's like this is something that you got to do for your entire life. You can't just do it in one section of your life and expect everything else to be good. Like you can't only come when it's bad and be like, God, get me back to the good part of my life. All right, I'm good now. Checking out. Or you can't only come when it's good because you're like, oh, this is really good. God's doing great things for me. And then when you get bad things happening, you're like, well, my life sucks and nobody cares about me and life like just terrible. You have to do it all the way around. It's a full encompassing life changing event that happens when you go to church and when you become a Christian, not just a once and done thing that means nothing after a certain period of time. Like it's continual. It always is continuing.
I mean, I just thought of like this person told me this one time. They said, you know, you go to church on Sunday because that's your it made them feel like that was their time with God. And like I know some pastors would be like, "Well, you're supposed to feel God all week, you know, you're supposed to be with him all week." But I mean, I feel like that's what it can be for some people. And I liked what you said earlier where you said that like you know, you were talking about it can't be just, you know, a section of your life. And I feel like that's so big nowadays because I feel like I know so many people that have had like different episodes of God. That's what I would
Mm-hmm.
call it. So, like, when I was young, I went to church and then I got good and then I left. And then when I was 30, I came back to church. It got good and then I left. It like, I feel like there's these episodes, as I would call it, and I feel like you can't have episodes of God. You have to be more of like this is a life commitment. That's why I always never understood why we. I know you're going through a confirmation class with some kids, but I always never understood why we did it because half the time kids would do it and then they would leave the church right after it. I was like,
Mm-hmm.
why'd you go through all that work and then you just left? I was like, that was, I mean, you can obviously tell their parents are making them do that. And
Right.
so, like, it was just like, I was like, why did you even do it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I've watched many kids go through confirmation. It's like I'm doing it because my older sibling did it, or my parents think it's good because they did it when they were kids and it helped them. And then you see them for the season of confirmation, and then once that is done, all right, we got what we needed. I'll see you in 20 years when I have a kid, and we'll do this again. Like
Exactly.
you can't be doing that. And I think I'm gonna say something really bold right now, but it's what I
Hmm.
believe, and debate me in the comments because I'd love to get debated on this, because it's my favorite thing to talk about. But it's our fault because we're not
Yep.
teaching the kids the correct way to live in a relationship with God. Because we are, I'm going to throw out the word traditioning again. We are traditioning them to believe what we believe, and that's not how they access God. They have to access God by the ways they find that they access God. They really have to wrestle with these questions about who is God, what is my purpose at the church, where do I stand in the church, what is my role, how do I contribute to this community. If we're not instilling those information and those feelings within them, they're gonna leave, and then they'll come back and be like, well, I was taught some good values and I appreciate these values and they've carried me through my life. I'm really not a professing faith walker anymore, but I want my kids to have them, so I'm gonna bring them back and we're gonna do this again. And I feel like that's the time we see people come back, like in those episodes. It's like I leave when I just get to the point where I'm learning how to be an adult or learning in those things. That's like
I'm going to
really where you
college.
need.
That's what I was going to say.
Yes, it's
I
like
was gonna say
really
that
where you need
episode
God.
starts always there. That is my biggest pet peeve right now. That's why I honestly, if I ever get a job where I can work with college students, I want to just hammer that into them. I want to say, dude, like everybody does this when they get to being a senior in high school. They're like, "Oh man, I'm getting ready to go to college. I'm gonna be a church person." They don't go to church at all.
No,
I
because
mean,
it's a
I saw
commitment.
so many of my friends do that, and I was like, dude, like, and you know what they do? They wait till they're like 20 like 8, and then they're like they have kids and they're like, "Oh, I better get them in church cuz my parents did that."
Yep.
I was like, "No, cuz then you're just telling you're you're telling your kids that it's only important because of them.
Hmm.
It's not important to yourself."
Right. Yeah, we
And
really
so
gotta
like
watch how we're doing this formation stuff, um, and making sure that we're instilling that in the people going forward with their lives. Because one of the reasons like I backed off from like youth ministry is like it's such a critical role in the church. Like it is, in my opinion, one of, if not the most important thing the church is doing, because these
mhm,
children are the ones that are the most susceptible to going away and walking out. Like adults coming, they have choice, they can make their own choices. Like kids, they
exactly.
don't really get that option. Like their parents are making them come. So if you're not making them want to be there, it really damages that relationship with them and wanting to go to church.
I think it comes back to like especially if you are I know you have said to me before that like you felt that you didn't get a place in the church when you were younger, like to spread
Yeah,
your to
yeah.
say your opinion, not your opinion, but kind of like show your worship style or whatever you would want
Hmm.
to call it. Um, but I feel like if we could get to do that, then that installs in the kids because I mean kids listen to kids.
Right.
I was just at a church conference, like a youth conference, and we had a great idea, and we actually did it. And it worked great. We picked 3 youth. I mean, we obviously like picked the ones that were like more of like the pastor's kids or whatever. So that way that we made sure that they would be okay because we didn't want to throw someone random in there and be like
Hmm.
preach a sermon. But we had them kind of like have a little. It was a sermon, but it wasn't a sermon because it was just like we gave them a story and then we were like kind of we gave them a small like thing that we wanted them to like kind of talk about with that story, and then we let them run with it. And I was like, that's what we need to be doing.
Hmm.
Um, but it can also be a really bad thing because I've heard a lot of stories of people, and this goes back to your struggles that you had, where you said that um, you weren't old enough, or that anything like that. But I've also seen where people have gotten burned out early because of that.
Hmm.
Because they're it's almost like stuff is thrown on top of them. Because I have a friend that their church, their pastor retired, and they had a person in the church that had been preaching while this person was like sick because they were an older person, and so when that person took over. They didn't actually take over as a pastor because it was a Baptist church, so they had to like vote in the person that they were gonna,
Hmm.
or hire the person that they were going to. Well, a lot of the people had voted for the person who had been doing it, which was this younger adult in the church. By young, I'm saying maybe like our age, like 20s through maybe 20 to 30. And he didn't have a seminary degree. He'd worked on it, but people didn't trust him because he didn't have that seminary degree.
Hmm.
But he'd been doing great as an interim pastor for that church, and it literally crushed me because I was like, you know, you're just wanting to stick with that tradition and all that.
Well, the funny part is like I was persecuted for the other reason because I was in school when I was a pastor, and they're like, you shouldn't be in school. You should be in a church working all the time. Like you should be led by the Spirit. You don't need to get an educate. Like there's both sides of it, and
Hmm.
when the last thing I want to say about this conversation is like when you give people that experience, it is so hard to have them stay. Like the fact that I'm here doing a religious podcast with you says a lot about me, not
Yeah.
about my experiences, because most other people who had had my experiences would have nothing to do with the church because they would have been hurt so bad by them that they would not be back here. But maybe
Okay.
this is a conversation for another podcast because we're kind of off topic. So I'm going to pull us back.
Well, so,
A
but I think it does match with it because I mean
little
we're getting
bit,
ready to talk.
yeah. But
We're getting ready to talk about, do you only go to church when your church is going well? Which this is a huge topic. That's why I wanted to save it for the end because like there's so many churches that after something goes bad, everybody
everybody
leaves.
splits.
Everybody leaves. I mean, it happened at my church. It's happened at like multiple churches in my area. I was like, this is so huge. And it's because of this church hopping mentality that
Hmm.
is in our culture right now. Because we're taught that, you got to make yourself happy or something like that. So you should go find a church that's going to make you happy. And I'm
Mm.
like, I mean, yeah, because like when my parents grew up, it was like, you stick with your church. That's your church family. You work through the problems. Um, but I mean, it's just so funny to like ask that question because like, there's so many stories like I could tell you about like of churches like they'll have something happen like they'll have usually what it is the church is doing great like it's growing like you have tons of services and stuff like that and then something huge will happen like at this one church uh one of the assistant pastors had a divorce
Yep.
and that was like huge so they were like and so that assistant pastor had to leave because divorce is bad.
Hmm.
I mean, I don't think that, but in church sometimes the older folks can think that's bad.
Yeah, because it's tied to
And
script. Yeah,
yeah, so because it's tied to scripture, and obviously, but
but there's other things the
uh,
Bible says against it. Keep going.
yeah, but everyone left and followed that guy wherever he went. So they formed a new church, like a completely new church,
Like
and
horrible.
all those people followed him. So
Um,
I definitely think you should not only go to the church when it's doing well. I think that's so huge. And like you could talk on that for like hours
oh yeah.
because there's so many problems with it because our culture just does it all the time. I mean, there's literally two churches in my community that have been split churches. That's what I call them like runoff churches, like where they came off of another church. And
Hmm.
like you can't what's the problem with that is there's no like there's such a mixture of beliefs that you don't know what belief they go under anymore. That's why they're non-denominational, but you don't know how you find your core beliefs. I mean, cuz I feel like as a church you should have core beliefs. I mean, you can also obviously have different opinions amongst people, but you have to have a core belief. But I'd like to hear what you had to say about it because it's really big for me. But I want to hear yours before I go on anymore.
Yeah, I had an interesting thought as you were talking. I was wondering. I'm like, I wonder if this church hopping thing is why we have so much divorce. Because it's like, oh, we don't like this thing. Cool. There's another church literally next door. Bye. I'm gonna go check them out, and then you go to a different church, and then it's another way of being divorced from that church. You just left it where it was,
Mhm.
and I think because there's so many. This is gonna be a big statement. Because there's so many options. We feel like we can just leave when it gets hard,
Mhm.
and I think that is a difficult thing. There is. I just saw this clip from Boy Meets World. It's when oh, the main character, I forget what his name is.
I haven't seen it, so it's all
Uh
on you.
so yeah, I'm trying to think what his name is. But the main character and he was dating this girl called Topanga. Um
Mhm.
and they split up because they were having an argument, and then his best friend Sean brings his parents to them, and they have an argument, and then they make up in front of them, and they're like, "Wait, what's that? What was how are you still like being all lovey dovey after you had that argument?" It's because like when you love each other, you don't leave. because it gets hard. You fix it and you make it work. And I think you hit the nail on the head because so many people are like, it's so much easier for me, and I will not get hurt, and nobody else is gonna get hurt if I just go, I don't agree with that. Later, I'm going this other place. But when you are doing church, this is the thing. You got to do church correctly. You are doing church correctly. It's a community. It is not a
Mm-hmm.
building. It is not a place you go. It is a community. So when you have that community and when you love and care about those people in that community, when you have a disagreement with them, you're not going to walk away from them because you are tied to them and you lose something if you walk away. So you have to fix it. And when you don't fix it, you lose a relationship. And it's not just losing a church, it's losing, you lose all those connections that you have within that church and all those people who have been holding you accountable for however long you've been at that church. You lose every bit of that when you walk out. And I
I mean,
think for us doing it well, it's nice to have a church that's going well. I haven't really
yeah,
experienced a church that, in my opinion, has their things together for more than a couple months at a time because something
I
else
know.
comes
Yeah.
up.
Well, I think it all sprawls from selfishness. I mean, it's like we think our happiness is more important than others.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, especially like if you think, oh, I can't deal with that person, who has a different opinion than me, that I have to go to a different church. Um, then you're just selfish. I mean, you can't listen to another perspective. Which we have that problem everywhere in the United States. I mean, we can't listen to anyone else's opinion without crucifying them literally.
Well, we're so like, we are trained to be so self-independent that it's a thread that runs through American society from the very beginning. It's included in the American Dream. We did a sermon on this a long time ago. A long time ago, it's like 6 months. But I did a sermon on this, and it's like it's tied to the American Dream. It's tied to the fabric and framework of America that we are so individualistic. But when it comes to religion, that is the one thing. If there's
That we
anything, that
can't
is the
do.
one thing you cannot do by yourself.
Hmm.
Because I had this conversation with my pastor, and I'm like, so if we're gonna think if we're gonna go back to the whole point of Christianity being what Jesus taught and the love that Jesus has, I can't have the love that Jesus shows. I can't love God and love neighbor if there's not a neighbor to love. So I
Hmm.
can't do it by myself. I need somebody else. I need some other people so that I can do it.
I mean, exactly. I mean, that's why I just feel like this conversation is so huge. Is like, especially now in this in our time. I mean, our podcast is supposed to be like about modern Christianity. Well, this is modern Christianity. There's
Yeah.
so much like division over my church isn't doing as well as yours. Come to my church.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I mean, it's almost like, and this is terrible, but there's so many churches doing this now. They advertise to people that have left churches, like, or to get people to come to my church. Like, oh, you shouldn't go to that church. You should come to my church.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I tell people this all the time. Like, if let's say you do a community event and you say, you're talking to people and they say they go to a different church. Well, you shouldn't immediately get upset. You should say, well, that's great. Like, I'm happy you're actually going to church.
You should celebrate they
I'm
actually
more,
go to a church.
that's what I'm saying. I'm more excited that you actually go to a church than if you don't go to mine. I mean, that's okay. I mean, I think this all sprawls out of like not the politics of church, but like the business side of church, which
Mm-hmm.
is the part people don't like to see. It's the part I wish I didn't see. Um, of like numbers and making sure you have enough money at your church and all this stuff. I mean, getting paid at a church is very hard nowadays, obviously.
Yep.
But
Yep.
and it's not because like it's not because people I mean, there is some people that just don't want to pay their people. They think you should volunteer because, God would volunteer, Jesus would volunteer. Well, Jesus also and God also understand that you need to make a living,
Yes.
and that being a church worker is sometimes a 24/7 uh activity or job.
Right.
And so I would say that, like, nowadays it's more just money. I mean, people aren't giving as good as they used to. It's mostly cuz, like,
They don't have as much.
uh yeah, well, I wouldn't say that. I think it's more
I'd
of
say
like,
that.
well, I would say it's more of like we're losing that culture that people had. Cuz, like, my grandma, she didn't make much, but she always I mean, I think there's a plan that some pastors go, it's like in a 10-10, I don't know the actual numbers. My pastor did it one time. It was like it was a like a plot of like how you should manage your money,
Mhm.
and and at least 10% of it, should go to your church, and that's what he said. And that 10% doesn't mean you have to, like, that 10% could be like $2.
Yeah.
I mean, or it could be like $100. So I'm like, you know, I think, I mean, our generation's terrible with managing money.
That's
Obviously, we're
true.
terrible at managing money. That's why everybody's in crippling debt, because they just want to spend, spend, spend. Um, but I think if we could get that, mentality of giving money back, then it wouldn't, we wouldn't have these problems that we would have where people are um, getting burned out at church, and then they're leaving, and then that's, getting people to leave. Because, I mean, I hate to say it, but a lot of people are people worshipers at church thing. Um, but what they do is, like, and this is where that feel good comes from, is what they're doing is they're going to that church for that person, not for the feel of God, not, not to be challenged by, their faith.
Mhm.
They're going there because they like this person. They like this child care at this church. They like all the children's ministry they're doing at this church. But and then as soon as that drops out, like as soon as that person retires, or as soon as that person gets fired, or as soon as that person gets let go, whatever you want to say, everybody goes with them. I've had that happen a couple times. I've had people, not specifically at my church, but I've seen it at other churches where a pastor will either retire, or he'll just get moved to a different church. Because in the Methodist church, they have, Matthew knows, but for the
It's
people
itinerant.
listening, yeah, it's itinerant. You get sent to a church by your conference or by your district, and so, like, a lot of times when that person will leave, they'll, people will leave with them. I mean, they won't leave and follow them. I mean, I've seen people do
Some
it, which
do.
is kind of, yeah, it's kind of weird and kind of stalkery. But they'll just leave that church in general because, that was the only thing keeping them there, which is sad.
It's also not the correct way to approach church. Because you
Yeah,
should be going to
exactly.
church to access God. You should be going to the church because it gives you the best way to access God. I'll say it, and something I've been thinking of is like there's always going to be another church that's doing what one thing better than you. They're doing something else better than you.
Exactly.
It's like if you're like, oh, I would look at a youth program. Well, the reason we don't have one is because this other church is
You haven't
doing it
started it
well,
yet.
and nobody else is willing to do it here because there's this other church that's doing it 5 minutes up the road that's way better than us. Why would we even try to do it? It's like that's you're asking to not get anywhere. Like you have to go to church for the right reason, and it's not for a person unless that person is God, and it's not for what the programs are being offered, but we should feel a sense of community. You should feel the presence of God in the place, and you should feel like this is where God wants you to be. And you stick with that and go from there.
Yeah. I think some of the final things we could say about this is, um, I mean, I don't think we, I don't think it's bad to only. I mean, if people do it, they do it. I mean, we can't control what people do,
Right.
obviously. And I know there's tons of people that church hop and do all that stuff. I've not done it. I still have my home church, but I have. I mean, and we're not saying it's not okay to go to a different church at some point. Sometimes you need a different perspective,
Right.
but we're saying making that church your home church, and like, and this the way this works a lot in our culture is like, I'll go to this church for 6 months, and then I'll go to this church for a year, and then I'll go to this church for 2 years. Well, that's what I'm considering church hopping. I'm not considering like, oh, I'm gonna go this church. I'm gonna try it out. Because I think definitely when you're starting out in Christianity, you should try different churches. You shouldn't just go to the first one that you visit,
Mm-hmm.
unless it's just so good. You felt that you felt God there, and it shouldn't be you're going to church. I mean, church nowadays, I mean, because I was talking about the business earlier, the business side. Well, the business side of church right now is we're trying to advertise church as and try to hit all these different things that people are wanting at a church. They're not wanting God.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's a big statement that I would say. I don't know. Not everyone is saying that. My mom would probably get mad at me for saying that just because she would say, not everybody's thinking that. But I would say that there's a strong majority of people that are looking for, you know, it goes back to what we said earlier in the podcast. My kids went, I want my kids to have the same experience I had, or I want my kids to, grow up in a good Christian, environment. And so we have all these churches trying to advertise for that. Especially like if you look at Vacation Bible School, like that's where we're really trying to get kids to come to it, and that's where you're trying to get your kids and stuff like that. And it, I just think if you're getting those people and then they're immediately leaving, then they didn't care about God. They were there for the material thing and not for not for the journey. My pastor talks all the time. He talks about being in a relationship with God is a journey, and you have to start it. And it's gonna have its ups and downs. I mean, I think the best way we can uh, summarize this episode is your church experience is gonna have ups and downs. You're gonna have the person that in your uh in one of your councils or whatever your background parts of church, you're gonna have that person you hate. And hate is a word we're not supposed to use as Christians, but there is some people that you would definitely sit down and say you hate because like they just make it hard to go to church, or they're just like always grumpy all the time, or but you got to learn to look past that and find the good in your church. I think that's one thing I've learned a lot lately, because like there'll be things that I see in that are happening in like either the Methodist church or my church in general, and I'm like, "Ugh, why are they doing that? Like they're just digging their own grave." But then I'll see like good things out of it, and I'll be like, I just need to get off of that bad vibes. Um, but I going back to like your journey, I think if you can make that perspective of church is going to be a journey of you're going to come in, and we have you come in bad sometimes, or you can come in good sometimes. Well, if that goes up to the good, then don't just say, well, I'm out. See ya. Hopefully it doesn't go bad. Or don't say, oh, when it goes bad, I'm out. I'm bailing on you. Sorry. Um, I think you just got to stick through, thick and thin. I mean, just look at the disciples. I mean, we have great examples in the Bible of people who stuck through till the, ends of their life. I mean, we have all the disciples who got either crucified or hung or killed or whatever they happened to them for worshiping their faith. And so, following God is not, sunshine and roses as everybody likes to say it is.
Yeah. You were Jesus never said it's gonna be easy. He says come and be a part. So you have to experience the hardship sometimes, and that's been part of the journey for me. I'm sure it's been part of the journey for Luke, and I'm sure it's been part of the journey for people who have stuck with it for their lives. Like you're gonna have those moments that are not great, but in those moments, that's when you should look back and be like, okay, I still have God. No matter what I'm going through, even if it's the worst possible thing that I could imagine, God's still gonna be with me, and I'm still gonna have God going through it with me. Like I'm not by myself. I'm not alone. And if you're doing church right, you have a church community that's gonna be with you too, and they're gonna be walking through you with all of these bad things too. So they won't abandon you, hopefully. And if they do,
Mhm.
well, they think about themselves a little bit.
You will become what my favorite term is. You're gonna become that wounded worshiper. You're gonna. I mean, I think we all have our battle scars. I think Matthew definitely does, and I think I do too. I mean, uh, Matthew's talked a little bit about his, past of his upcoming of a, seminary worker, going through seminary and all that stuff, and you have to deal with a lot of people. So like,
Oh yeah.
just I mean, it's okay to be a wounded worshiper. I think we all are wounded worshipers.
We're all gonna have that thing that's a part of us that we've experienced. So you gotta find that community that's going to not hold that against you and love you just because you're there. So well, I think
Well,
we've
I hope
covered everything.
I hope this has been a good episode. I mean, we've kind of went off the rails, but I think
Fruitful
that it is.
conversation still.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've set up some great conversations for people to have because this is like one that we could go on for hours and talk about. Um, but I think that if we just remember, church isn't easy, and it's not it's not something we just kind of. I mean, as I said, we don't just go when it's good. I mean, I, I don't. There's sometimes I wake up and I don't want to go to church. I don't want to see those people. Um, I mean, I like all the people at my church, but there's some days you just want to lay in your bed and do whatever. But I mean, if we can just remember that, it's a journey. It's not something where you just do your episodes. It's a journey.
Yeah. And if that's
You
a
have any
problem for
final
you,
thoughts, Matthew?
if that's a problem for you, you don't want to go to church in the morning, find somebody who keeps you accountable and it's like, hey, Luke, go to church. Why are you
Yeah.
not at church, bud? I know I can see you're not here. Why are you not here? Come here. Get here.
Oh,
I'll come pick you
well,
up.
that's a big thing.
We'll go to lunch. Come on.
I mean, for people that might be listening to podcasts that haven't went to church, I mean, one big thing that will happen, and you'll notice this is if you're not there one Sunday and you come back, they'll be like, "Well, where were you?" They'll ask where you were because people care.
Yeah.
As much as you don't think, people will care. Or if you haven't been there in a long time, I've texted people and been like, "Hey, where are you at? Why aren't you at church?" Oh,
Yeah.
but
Well,
this has been
if
a
you
good
guys
conversation.
if you guys do want to hear any of those like little side tangents fleshed out a little bit more, let us know. Of course, we always are looking for your comments, and we thank you for leaving comments because we did have one, and I'm excited about it. It was so nice to have a comment. So please feel free to
And the
continue
views
to
have
leave
been good
comments.
too.
Yeah, they've been great. We appreciate you guys watching, and I hope you have enjoyed and are getting fulfilled out of this. And this is part of your, spiritual practice. I said that
And I
before. I'm like,
appreciate I definitely appreciate Matthew. He's sick right now, but we're recording our podcast, and
what's sickness? It doesn't matter.
yeah, and he's done a great job.
You've done a great job. So this is your topic. So I'm just kind of here for the ride today. and it's been a fun conversation.
It didn't
But
really
yeah.
go where we thought it was gonna
No,
go. We thought we were gonna. We thought. I mean, you had told me you wanted to talk about Job and all that. And we didn't even talk
we can
about
talk about
Job.
Job, but Job, yeah, go back to the bad part. Read
Put
Job.
Job there. Read
There's
Job.
your work. Read Job. There you go.
Or I
Read
saw
Job.
this, so I'm gonna leave this and I'm gonna call this guy out because I watched his stuff on Instagram. His name's Taylor Ramsey. He's really cool. He did this one. He did this one Instagram post where it was, what if Trump was a pastor? You know, what if he wrote a what if he wrote a sermon, and he said he said his sermon title was, or his not his sermon title, but his scripture was from Job. But he said today we're supposed to be reading from the book of Job. And he said, because of all these jobs I've created or something like that, I don't need to read that. And it cracked me up so much. So if you haven't got to check that out, check that out. He's hilarious. And he makes some funny videos, but
And having done a study in Job a couple months ago at this point, it's a really worthwhile book, especially like it doesn't seem like the thing you want to read when you're going through it bad, but it's the thing to read when you're going through it bad. It's a really nice and helpful book. So would recommend. That's your challenge. Read the book. Read Job.
maybe we need to start having like a chapter you should read every week or something. I don't know.
We can.
Put that in the comment if you want, like, a chapter we're reading, we'll go over it or whatever. We could make this kind of like a little,
Bible study.
first 5 minutes will be like a little Bible study and we'll talk about stuff. I don't know. This podcast can be whatever you guys want it to be. That's how I kind of want it to be.
That's the fun part about it.
We always wanted it to become like where it was community driven and we were just talking. If it becomes community driven, then all we have to do is get on here and be like, yeah, this is what I believe, but you guys are gonna bombard us in the comments.
We're gonna have the conversations you don't want to have, so you can just listen to it. And then you'll be like, hey, you didn't mention this.
Screaming at your phone. You could just scream at your phone and be like, this is what I believe, and then nobody will have to hear it,
If you're doing that, I want to send me a video. Like, if you know me, just send me a video of you yelling at the script. Because I do it all the time. It's like, no, that's wrong. Stop. What are you talking about? Yeah, we do appreciate your comments, so please continue to do that. And you can leave them on both YouTube and Spotify. There are places for that. I usually have a question. There's a Q&A section, so there's a question that I let you answer. You want to go on something else, feel free. YouTube comments or just YouTube comments or comments or just whatever you want to put in there.
Mm-hmm. We got Twitter too.
We do have Twitter. Yeah,
it's not Twitter anymore. But
you can tweet at us. It is Twitter.
We're gonna call it Twitter.
You can tweet at us at the Salted Orange Podcast or Salted Orange Pod. Exactly. I don't know what it is. Whatever it is, you'll find it.
It's somewhere.
Yeah, I can look. I can look it up right now while we're talking. So we have it now. Doing stuff,
but this was definitely a difficult conversation to have.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it was easy, but I don't think it was also. I think it was still not super difficult. It's like there's definitely harder topics, but and our Twitter handle is at Salted Orange Pod. That's all the spaces there is. So at Salted Orange Pod on Twitter if you want to follow us.
I think the biggest thing I would like for people to comment about is if you've had that experience of people in your church that left as soon as things went bad. I mean, because I know so many people that could tell me those stories, but I want to see it in the comments so that way we can be like, we can learn from it and we can say, there is a lot of people suffering from that.
And please remember people's privacy when you're leaving those comments, just because, we don't need to be exposing people. That's not what we're about.
Yeah, we don't need to do that.
Just be like, I saw this person do this thing. It's like, okay, that's it. Yeah. No names and this person who lives at P. Sherman 42 Wallaby Way, Sydney. We don't need to know that stuff.
Yeah, but or I mean, if you left a church because it went bad, I mean,
That's
no shame, no
yeah.
shame. I mean, sometimes you just got to leave that experience. I mean, sometimes the church turns on you. I mean, I've seen pastors, especially I've seen it happen to pastors. They run them out of the church. But this has been a great episode, I feel like. But just make sure you subscribe and make sure that you are listening in every 2 weeks because we're on a 2 week upload schedule. I think the next one should be coming up by Christmas. We haven't even, talked about what we're gonna, record for that. So if you have any ideas, shoot us those ideas, and
Yeah, the next one
I'll be
actually should be Christmas Eve.
yeah.
Ooh, should be a fun one.
So
Christmas Eve. Christmas time is here. Don't get too
but
carried away with the holidays. That's all I'm gonna
yeah,
say.
remember what it's about. That might be one of our topics.
Ooh, that'd be a fun topic. I can go
So,
off on all the people who are celebrating and before Halloween. Oh, my personal
with
vendettas can come out. It'll be great.
with that said, my name's Luke, and this is Matthew over here. You can't see him, but I can see him. But we've had a great time speaking, with each other. And I hope you guys enjoy the episode. See you later.